What happens when you humiliate your husband in front of your affair partner at a family gathering, only to discover he's been quietly documenting every betrayal for months? Can a woman who gaslit her spouse into believing he was paranoid survive the moment legal papers are served in front of everyone she manipulated? How does it feel when the man you destroyed reclaims his dignity through the courtroom instead of confrontation? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. The kitchen clock read 10:47 p.m. when I finally walked through the front door. Derek was standing at the sink, rinsing the plates from dinner. The third night this week, he'd kept the kids' food warm while waiting for me. The overhead light cast shadows under his eyes, making him look older than 36. He turned when he heard my keys hit the counter. He didn't say anything at first, just dried his hands on the dish towel with those careful, methodical movements that had always irritated me. Everything about Derek was careful and methodical, predictable, safe, boring. He asked if everything was okay at work. I felt the familiar spike of annoyance in my chest. There it was again, that tone, the one that pretended to be concern but was really just control dressed up in gentle questions. I told him he wouldn't understand the pressure I was under. My voice came out sharper than I intended, but honestly, he deserved it. He'd never supported my career ambitions the way a real partner should. He mentioned that I'd been getting home late a lot recently. He wondered if there was something going on that we should talk about. I set my purse down harder than necessary. I asked him if he was seriously doing this again. I said I was tired of feeling like I had to report my every movement to him like some kind of prisoner. I reminded him that I had responsibilities at work, that my job actually required me to network and build relationships, that not everyone could just leave at 5 o'clock sharp every day like he did. Derek's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't raise his voice. He said he wasn't trying to control me. He just missed having dinner together as a family. He said the kids missed it too. The kids. Of course he'd bring up the kids. That was his favorite weapon, making me feel guilty for actually having a career, for wanting something beyond microwave chicken nuggets and bedtime stories. I told him his obsession with family dinners was suffocating my growth. I said maybe if he'd ever shown any interest in my emotional needs, I wouldn't feel so disconnected from this household. He looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said he was going to check on Iris and Owen before bed. He asked if I wanted to come up with him. I told him I needed to shower first. I grabbed my phone from my purse, making sure the screen faced away from him, and headed upstairs. In the bathroom, I locked the door and turned on the water, letting the steam fill the small space. I checked my messages. Callum had sent 3 texts. The first was a photo of the co-working space where we'd spent the afternoon, the natural light streaming through those industrial windows he loved. The second asked if I'd gotten home okay. The third said he couldn't stop thinking about our conversation, about how much we understood each other. I smiled at my phone, feeling that warm flutter in my chest that Derek hadn't inspired in years. This was what connection felt like. Real connection, not the performative domesticity Derek mistook for love. I typed back quickly, telling Callum I'd made it home fine. I said my husband was being paranoid again, questioning where I'd been. I added that sometimes I felt like I was living with a jailer instead of a partner. Callum responded immediately. He said I deserved better than that. He said I deserved someone who celebrated my independence instead of trying to control it. I sat on the edge of the tub, phone in hand, and felt validated in a way I hadn't felt in months, maybe years. Derek had driven me to this. His emotional unavailability, his boring stability, his complete inability to see me as anything more than a mother and a bill payer. When I finally emerged from the bathroom 25 minutes later, the bedroom was empty. I found Derek down the hall, lying on the floor of Iris's room. Our 7-year-old daughter was asleep in her bed, one small hand dangling over the edge, resting in Derek's open palm. For a second, just a second, I felt something twist in my stomach, something that might have been guilt if I let myself think about it too long. But I didn't let myself think about it. Instead, I went back to our bedroom, checked my phone one more time, saw another message from Callum, and smiled. Whatever I was doing, whatever this was becoming, it was Derek's fault for letting our marriage get to this point. I'd tried to be happy in this suffocating suburban life. I'd tried to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect daughter-in-law at every tedious family gathering. But nobody appreciated the sacrifices I'd made. Nobody saw how much I'd given up. If Derek had paid attention to me the way Callum did, if he'd made me feel seen and valued and desirable, none of this would be happening. I was simply reacting to years of neglect. The next afternoon, I left work early to meet Callum at the co-working space downtown. We'd been meeting there for the past 6 weeks, ever since the marketing conference where we'd first connected. He was a freelance graphic designer with an artist's soul, the kind of person who actually understood creativity and passion and taking risks. We sat at the corner table in the attached cafe, the one with the view of the street. Callum was showing me his latest project on his laptop, his knee brushing against mine under the table. I laughed at something he said, feeling lighter than I had in years. I didn't notice the sedan parked across the street. I didn't see Derek sitting in the driver's seat, his phone pointed toward the cafe window. I didn't know he'd found the receipt I'd carelessly left in my jacket pocket, the one time-stamped at 3:45 p.m. from yesterday, when I'd claimed to be in client meetings until 7. I didn't know he'd driven downtown on his lunch break, following a hunch he probably hated himself for having. I didn't know he was taking photographs of Callum and me through the glass, documenting the timestamp, noting the location in some app on his phone. All I knew was that for 90 blissful minutes, I sat with someone who made me feel alive, someone who asked about my dreams and ambitions instead of when I'd be home for dinner, someone who looked at me like I was fascinating instead of familiar. When I finally checked the time and realized I needed to get back to the office for a real meeting, Callum walked me to my car. He touched my lower back as he opened my car door, and I felt that electric charge that had been missing from my marriage for so long. I drove back to work feeling justified in every choice I'd made. Derek had turned me into someone who needed this kind of connection. If he'd been a better husband, a more attentive partner, a more interesting person, I wouldn't have gone looking elsewhere. This was his failure, not mine. That evening, I made it home by 8:30, early by recent standards. I walked into the house expecting Derek to be relieved, maybe even appreciative. Instead, I found him in his home office, the small bedroom we'd converted when we first bought this house. He was sitting at the desk, several manila folders spread out in front of him. The laptop was open, showing what looked like a spreadsheet, but he closed the screen the moment I appeared in the doorway. I asked what he was doing. He said he was updating our budget spreadsheet, something about quarterly expenses and tax documents. His voice was calm, almost disinterested. I pressed him, asking why he looked so secretive about it. I said if he was hiding money from me, I had a right to know. Derek stood up slowly, closing the folders on the desk. He said he wasn't hiding anything. He said all our accounts were joint, as they'd always been. He said he was simply organizing our records, because he'd let things get disorganized over the past few months. The way he looked at me, there was something different in his eyes. Not anger exactly. Something colder. Something that made me think of the way he looked when he was solving complex problems at work, breaking them down into manageable pieces. I told him he was acting weird. I said if he had something to say to me, he should just say it instead of being passive-aggressive. He said he had nothing to say right now. He said he was tired and was going to bed. I watched him walk past me, carrying one of the folders with him. The label on the tab read Household in his neat handwriting. For some reason, that label made me uneasy, though I couldn't say why. I pushed the feeling away. Derek was probably just having one of his moods, being dramatic about me working late. He'd get over it like he always did. He was too passive, too conflict-averse to actually do anything. That night, I lay in our bed scrolling through my phone, exchanging messages with Callum until well past midnight. In the guest room down the hall, Derek lay awake staring at the ceiling, a locked phone on the nightstand beside him. On that phone, In a protected folder were 17 photographs, 5 saved text message screenshots, and a detailed timeline spreadsheet noting dates, times, and locations. But I didn't know any of that. I fell asleep smiling at my screen, thinking about the life I deserved, the one I was finally brave enough to reach for. The invitation to Janelle's rooftop gathering came through a group chat on Wednesday. She was celebrating some work promotion and had rented out the West Terrace at the Altitude Lounge for Friday night. The message said to bring friends, and the moment I saw it, I thought of Callum. I told him about it that afternoon during one of our coffee meetings. I said it would be fun, that my friends from work would be there, that it was the kind of scene he'd appreciate. Creative people, good energy, none of the suburban stuffiness I dealt with at home. Callum hesitated at first. He mentioned that I'd told him my marriage was complicated right now. He asked if it was really a good idea to mix our worlds like that. I told him I introduced him as my marketing consultant all the time, which was technically true. He had helped me with some campaign graphics. I said nobody would think anything of it. I said I was tired of hiding the one friendship that actually brought me joy. I didn't mention that Derek had also been invited to the party. That detail slipped my mind completely. Or maybe I convinced myself it didn't matter. Either way, when Friday evening arrived, I picked up Callum from his apartment and we drove downtown together. The Altitude Lounge was exactly the kind of place I loved. Industrial chic, exposed brick, string lights crisscrossing the open-air terrace, the city skyline glittering in the distance. Janelle had gone all out with cocktails and appetizers. About 30 people were already there when we arrived at 8. I introduced Callum to everyone as my colleague who was helping with our spring marketing campaign. Janelle gave me a knowing look. I'd told her about him during lunch breaks, complained about my marriage, gotten her validation that I deserved happiness, but she played along perfectly. Callum was charming and funny, and everything Derek wasn't. He told stories about his freelance work, made people laugh, fit seamlessly into the group. I felt proud walking next to him, felt seen in a way I never did standing beside my husband at these things. Around 9 o'clock, I was laughing at something Callum had said, my hand resting on his forearm, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Derek's co-worker Tom was saying hello to Janelle near the bar, and next to Tom, looking uncomfortable in a button-down shirt and jeans, was Derek. My stomach dropped for just a second. Then I remembered I had nothing to hide. I was at a work friend's party with a colleague. There was nothing wrong with that. Derek was the one being paranoid and controlling, showing up to check on me like I was a child who couldn't be trusted. I watched Derek order a drink, just one, always so careful about everything, and scan the terrace. His eyes found me within seconds. I saw something flicker across his face, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. I decided the best defense was offense. I excused myself from Callum and walked over to Derek with a bright smile. I said I was surprised to see him there. I asked if he was checking up on me again. My voice carried just enough that a few people nearby glanced over. Derek's jaw tightened, but his expression stayed neutral. He said Tom had invited him weeks ago. He said he hadn't realized I'd be here. I laughed. A little too loud, a little too sharp. I said that was convenient timing. I said he never wanted to go out when I invited him to things, but apparently he had no problem showing up to spy on me. Derek didn't take the bait. He just said he hoped I had a good evening and walked toward the opposite end of the terrace where Tom was talking to someone I didn't recognize. I went back to Callum, feeling vindicated somehow, like I'd won a confrontation that hadn't actually happened. Janelle appeared at my elbow with a fresh drink and a raised eyebrow. She asked if that was my husband. I confirmed it was. She said this might get interesting. As the night progressed, I felt emboldened by the cocktails and the attention and the way Callum stayed close to me, laughing at my jokes, making me feel like the most fascinating person in the room. At some point, a group of us was standing near the railing, and someone brought up relationships and marriage. I heard myself say that some people never emotionally grow past a certain point. I said it was exhausting being with someone who was so rigid and emotionally stunted that they couldn't handle their partner having friends or a career or any kind of independence. Callum shifted uncomfortably beside me, but I kept going. I said my husband was so insecure that he probably thought I was cheating on him just because I came home late a few nights. I said it was suffocating, living with someone who couldn't understand that I needed space to be myself. The group laughed, some more awkwardly than others. Janelle tried to change the subject, but I was on a roll now, feeling powerful and justified and free. I said it was sad how some men couldn't handle a woman being more successful than them. I said emotional unavailability destroyed relationships, and some people needed to look in the mirror before blaming their partners for checking out. Across the terrace, Derek was standing with Tom near the bar. I don't know if he could hear what I was saying, but something in his posture told me he knew I was talking about him. He didn't look angry. He looked sad, and somehow that was worse. Tom was saying something to him, looking concerned. Derek shook his head, finished his drink, and set the glass down on the bar with careful precision. Then he walked toward the exit without looking back. I felt a moment of something, guilt maybe, or shame, but I pushed it down. He'd brought this on himself by showing up here. If he didn't want to hear the truth about our marriage, he should have stayed home. Callum excused himself to the restroom a few minutes later. While he was gone, Janelle pulled me aside near the string lights. She said I might want to be more careful about what I said in public. She said someone had been taking photos earlier, and things had a way of ending up on social media. I told her I didn't care. I said I was done hiding my feelings to protect Derek's fragile ego. I said if people were going to talk, they might as well know the truth, that I was in a marriage with someone who didn't appreciate me, and I'd finally found people who did. Janelle looked like she wanted to say something else, but I walked away before she could. Callum came back, and we stayed until nearly midnight, drinking and laughing, and pretending the whole Derek incident hadn't happened. I drove Callum home. I'd had less to drink than him, and the drive gave us extra time together. He was quieter than usual in the passenger seat. When I asked if everything was okay, he said he just didn't want to cause problems in my life. I assured him he wasn't causing problems. I said Derek was causing problems by being controlling and jealous and refusing to let me have friends. I said Callum was the best thing that had happened to me in years. He seemed satisfied with that answer. When I dropped him off, he kissed me quickly before getting out of the car. Just a brief press of lips that could have been friendly, except we both knew it wasn't. I drove home feeling electric and alive and completely certain that I was on the right path. The house was dark when I arrived, except for one light in the kitchen. Derek wasn't in our bedroom. I found him asleep on the couch in the living room, still fully dressed, his phone on the coffee table beside him. I decided not to wake him. I went upstairs, changed, and climbed into our empty bed. I didn't sleep well. Sometime around 3 a.m, I got up to get water and found Derek in his office again, laptop open, folders spread across the desk. He must have heard me in the hallway because he closed the laptop screen before I reached the doorway. I asked what he was doing awake. He said he couldn't sleep. He said he was working on some things. I asked what things. He said just household stuff, organization, preparing for upcoming expenses. The way he said it, so calm, so detached, made me defensive. I told him if he had something to say to me, he should just say it. I said I was tired of his passive-aggressive routine. Derek looked at me directly for the first time. He said he had nothing to say right now. He said when he was ready to talk about our future, I'd know. I asked what that was supposed to mean. He said I should get some sleep. He said we'd talk when the time was right. I went back to bed angry and unsettled, though I couldn't articulate why. Derek stayed in his office until dawn, organizing documents and updating spreadsheets I never bothered to ask about. The next morning, I woke to 17 notifications on my phone. Most were from the group chat with work friends. Someone had posted photos from the party. In one image, Callum and I were standing very close together, his hand on my lower back, my face tilted up toward him, laughing. The composition and lighting made it look intimate, more than friendly. The caption read, "Some people just glow around the right energy." My sister Simone had been tagged in the post. She'd commented, "Thess, call me." My mother had commented, "People are talking. This is embarrassing." Derek was visible in the background of the photo, watching us from across the terrace, his expression unreadable. I felt my face flush hot. I wanted to delete the whole thing, but it had already been shared and commented on by at least a dozen people. Some of them I barely knew. Before I could figure out how to respond, my phone rang. Simone. I answered, already defensive. She asked what was going on with me. She said that photo didn't look good. She asked if I was actually having an affair. I told her she was being dramatic. I said Callum was a work colleague, and people needed to stop making something out of nothing. Simone asked me point blank if I was sleeping with him. I hesitated just long enough to give her the answer. She sighed into the phone, long and disappointed. She said I needed to think about what I was doing to Derek. She said I needed to think about what I was doing to my kids. I told her she didn't understand. I said Derek had been emotionally checked out for years. I said I'd tried everything to connect with him, to make our marriage work, but he was too rigid and boring and uninterested in me as a person. I said even if I was seeing someone else, which I wasn't officially, Derek had driven me to it. Simone went quiet on the other end. Then she said she'd always looked up to me, thought I had everything figured out. She said she was disappointed to realize I was just making excuses for bad behavior. I hung up on her. Later that Sunday, I went to Simone's apartment for our mother's usual family brunch, a tradition Simone had inherited when she got her own place. I showed up expecting support, or at least neutrality. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Simone was in the kitchen when I arrived, and the moment I set my purse down, she asked if we could talk privately. We went into her bedroom, and she showed me her phone. The photo from the party had been shared to another group, Derek's family. His sister Claire had commented, "Derek deserves better than this." His mother Brenda had commented, "This is heartbreaking." I felt my defenses rise immediately. I told Simone that Derek's family had always been overbearing and judgmental. I said they'd never thought I was good enough for their precious son. Simone said that wasn't true, and I knew it. She said they'd always been kind to me. She said I was rewriting history to make myself feel better about what I was doing. I asked her whose side she was on. She said she was on the side of basic human decency. She said if I was unhappy in my marriage, I should get divorced instead of humiliating Derek publicly while I carried on with someone else. I told her she didn't understand how complicated marriage was. I said Derek had emotionally abandoned me long before I ever met Callum. I said I was simply finding the connection I deserved. Simone asked if I could even hear myself. She asked if I realized I sounded exactly like every other person who cheated and tried to blame their spouse for it. We argued for another 20 minutes before I grabbed my purse and left. On my way out, my mother stopped me in the hallway. She pulled me aside, her face tight with anger. She said I was embarrassing the entire family. She said people from church had called her asking about that photo. She said if I didn't get my act together, she would distance herself from this situation entirely. I told her she should be supporting me, not judging me. She said support wasn't the same as enabling self-destruction. Then she walked back into Simone's apartment and closed the door. I drove home furious, convinced everyone was turning against me for no reason. In my mind, I was the victim of Derek's emotional neglect, of my family's judgment, of a society that expected women to stay in unfulfilling marriages just to avoid scandal. When I got home, I found Derek loading Iris and Owen into his car. He said he was taking them to the park. He didn't invite me. He didn't even look at me. I went inside the empty house and checked my phone. Callum had texted, "Hey, saw some stuff online. Want to talk later?" I responded immediately. "Everyone's overreacting. They don't understand us." He took 40 minutes to reply. "Maybe we should cool things down for a bit." I stared at that message, feeling something crack in my chest. I texted back asking if he was serious. I said I'd risked everything for this connection. He wrote, "You're married. I didn't realize how messy this was going to get." I called him. It went straight to voicemail. When Derek came home with the kids 3 hours later, I was still sitting on the couch, phone in hand, trying to figure out when everything had spiraled out of control. Derek got the kids settled in the living room with a movie, then disappeared into his office. I heard the printer running. I heard file drawers opening and closing. I heard him on the phone with someone, his voice too low to make out words. That night, lying alone in our bedroom again, I realized Derek hadn't slept in our bed in 4 days. And for the first time, I wondered if I'd miscalculated something fundamental. Monday morning arrived with the weight of consequence I'd been trying to ignore all weekend. I walked into the office at 8:30, stopped at the break room for coffee, and immediately felt the shift in energy. Troy from the marketing team was there, chatting with someone from HR. When I walked in, their conversation stopped abruptly. Troy gave me a tight smile and excused himself. The HR person, Michelle, I think her name was, nodded politely and left her coffee half-finished on the counter. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself it was just a coincidence. But by 10 o'clock, when I walked past a cluster of cubicles and heard my name followed by immediate silence, I knew the rooftop bar photo had made its way through the office. Janelle found me at my desk around 10:30. She sat down in my guest chair and spoke quietly. She said people were talking. She said someone had forwarded the photo to the company's leadership team because it had been tagged with our company's name in several comments. I asked her why that mattered. I said what I did in my personal life was nobody's business. Janelle said I'd introduced Callum as a marketing consultant we were working with. She said some people thought it looked unprofessional, potentially like I was mixing personal relationships with company vendors. I felt my face get hot. I said Callum had done some freelance work for me, which was true. I said people were making something out of nothing because they were bored and judgmental. Janelle said she believed me, but she wanted me to know that my manager Linda had asked to see me after lunch. The rest of the morning crawled by. I couldn't focus on my work. I kept refreshing my phone, checking to see if Callum had responded to the 3 messages I'd sent him since yesterday. He hadn't. At 1 o'clock, Linda's assistant sent me a calendar invitation. Quick check-in, conference room B, 1:30 p.m. I walked into that conference room feeling defensive and angry, already building my case before Linda even spoke. She was sitting at the table with a printed copy of the photo in front of her, along with some screenshots of comments I couldn't quite read from across the table. Linda started by saying this was an informal conversation. She said she wanted to talk about our social media policy and professionalism expectations. I asked if I was being reprimanded for going to a party outside of work hours. Linda said no. She said the concern was that I'd publicly identified Callum as a business associate while engaging in what appeared to be a personal relationship. She said several people had commented on the optics, and it had created questions about whether proper vendor protocols had been followed. I felt the rage building in my chest. I told her that my husband was the one creating problems. I said Derek had been sabotaging my reputation because he was jealous of my success. I said he'd probably been spreading rumors to people who knew him professionally, trying to make me look bad. Linda's expression didn't change. She said she wasn't making any judgments about my personal life. She said she simply needed to ensure that all vendor relationships were being handled appropriately and that company resources weren't being used for personal matters. I asked if anyone else in the office had ever been interrogated about their social media posts. Linda said she wasn't interrogating me. She said she was having a conversation that was required given the circumstances. She said going forward, I should be mindful about how I represented myself and the company in public spaces, especially online. The meeting lasted 15 minutes that felt like an hour. I left feeling humiliated and furious, convinced Derek had somehow orchestrated this entire situation. I went back to my desk and sent him a text. Did you report me to my manager? Is that your revenge? He responded 3 hours later. I haven't contacted your workplace. Whatever is happening there is a consequence of your own choices. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. That Saturday was Derek's nephew's 6th birthday party, a family gathering at the community centre hall his parents had rented out. Normally, I would have found an excuse to miss it, but I knew my absence would just create more drama. I arrived 30 minutes late, not entirely by accident. The party was already in full swing, kids running around the decorated hall, adults clustered in conversation groups, a massive superhero-themed cake on the main table. Derek's mother, Brenda, saw me first. She was standing near the punch bowl with Derek's father, Paul, and his sister, Claire. The moment our eyes met, Brenda's face hardened into something I'd never seen before. She walked toward me with purpose. She asked if we could speak outside. I said I'd just arrived and wanted to say hello to everyone first. Brenda said it wasn't a request. We went out to the community centre's side entrance, where there were a few benches overlooking the parking lot. Claire followed us, her arms crossed over her chest. Brenda didn't waste time. She said she'd seen the photos online. She said she knew what was going on. She said I was destroying her son and traumatizing her grandchildren, and she would not stand by and watch it continue. Brenda cut me off before I could defend myself. She said she'd known me for 9 years, welcomed me into their family, protected me, celebrated with me, and she was devastated to learn I was capable of this kind of cruelty. Claire said she'd documented everything I'd posted online, screenshots, timestamps, witnesses. If Derek needed evidence, she had it. I asked if they were threatening me. Brenda said they were protecting Derek and the kids. I could start acting like a responsible adult, or be permanently shut out of the family. I snapped. I accused them of being controlling, smothering, overbearing. I blamed Derek's upbringing for his emotional issues. Brenda went cold. She said I didn't get to blame Derek for my infidelity. I said I'd never admitted to cheating. Claire laughed. She said I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. Then my mother arrived, purse clutched, already tense. Brenda asked her to talk sense into me. My mother turned to me and asked if I was having an affair. I tried to lie, but she said she'd seen multiple photos, forwarded by church friends, pictures of me with the same man, looking intimate. I insisted they were work events. My mother said I was lying, and that she was ashamed of me. She said she'd raised me better than this, that if I was unhappy, there were honorable ways to handle it. Publicly humiliating Derek wasn't one of them. Then she apologized to my in-laws on my behalf. They walked back to the party together, leaving me standing alone. Inside, the birthday celebration went on without me. People avoided my eyes. Derek looked relaxed with the kids, like he'd already separated himself emotionally. During the cake cutting, I checked my phone. A message from Callum. "We need to take a break. This is too complicated." The room tilted. When I looked up, Derek was watching me with something like finality, resolution, not pain. After the party, Derek loaded the kids into his car without asking if I wanted to help. I watched them drive away separately from me, like we were already 2 households. At home, I heard Derek on the phone through his cracked office door. Calm, professional words. Documentation, timeline, consultation scheduled. When I confronted him, he said I'd find out through proper channels, that I'd turned him into someone he didn't recognize. That night, he packed bags for the kids. They were staying at his parents' house while he handled personal business. When I threatened him about custody, money, lawyers, he quietly set his phone on the counter, recording everything. I fell silent. The kids kissed me goodbye without enthusiasm and followed him out. The house felt hollow when they were gone. Something inside me felt hollow too. The guest room became Derek's bedroom. I confronted him. He said sharing a bed would be dishonest now. He asked if I was still talking to Callum, if I was sleeping with him. I got defensive, accused him of jealousy. He said the evidence didn't lie. He said private conversations were over. Everything moving forward would be handled legally. That night at the grocery store, Iris asked why Daddy cried at night, and whether I had a boyfriend. A stranger overheard everything. Iris cried and ran to Derek. The kids clung to him in the car, not me. That weekend, he took them to his parents' house again. When they returned, they barely acknowledged me. Derek said they were reacting to the instability I'd caused, not his behavior. He listed everything. The late nights, the secrecy, the humiliation, introducing Callum into their lives. Then he said my version of reality wouldn't matter soon. Later, I tried to get into his office. Everything was locked. On his desk was a calendar filled with red circles and cryptic notes, appointments I didn't know about. That night, I lay alone in our bed while he moved around the guest room and his phone buzzed with reminders. For the first time, it hit me. He wasn't bluffing. He was preparing. And for the first time, I was truly afraid. The call from Callum came on a Wednesday evening while I was driving home, dragging my feet because the empty house felt colder every day. When his name flashed on the dashboard, hope sparked in my chest. Maybe he'd realized what we had was worth the chaos. Maybe he'd finally choose me. Instead, he asked me to meet him at the Riverside Park. 20 minutes later, I found him on a bench facing the water, hands shoved in his pockets, sunset turning everything gold and making the moment feel falsely beautiful. He said we needed to talk. When I tried to take his hand, he pulled away. Things were too complicated, he said. He didn't think we should keep seeing each other. Panic rose instantly. I blamed Derek, promised I'd handle it, said I'd been planning to leave anyway. Callum looked at me like he was seeing me clearly for the first time. He said he didn't believe I'd ever planned to leave Derek, that I'd just wanted both lives at once and he'd let me. He said he didn't want to be the guy who helped break up a family. He said my kids deserved better than this mess. I insisted he was the only one who understood me, painted Derek as emotionally absent, the usual script. Callum didn't buy it. From what he'd seen, he said, Derek sounded like a decent man who'd been trying to hold things together while I checked out. Then he admitted he'd been seeing someone else, someone single, without drama. It had made him realize what we were doing wasn't fair to anyone. I broke down, sobbing, insisting I'd sacrificed everything for us. He said I'd sacrificed everything for a fantasy, that I'd turned him into a savior he'd never agreed to be. Then he told me he hoped I'd figure things out for my kids' sake and walked away without looking back. I stayed on that bench until it was dark and cold, then drove home with swollen eyes and shaking hands. Derek's car was in the driveway. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table surrounded by folders and his laptop. His face was flat and distant when he looked up. I told him we needed to talk. He said he was busy. I pushed anyway. I begged for counseling, a second chance, a way to fix things. He asked if I'd ended it with Callum. It was the first time he'd said his name directly. I said it didn't matter. It was over. He asked if it was over because I'd chosen to end it, or because Callum had. I couldn't answer. That was enough. Derek explained, calmly, that it was too late for repairs. He'd been consulting professionals. He'd been documenting everything. I demanded to know what he meant. He opened a folder. Photos of me and Callum at the cafe, the co-working space, the rooftop bar. Screenshots of posts, printed text messages, a spreadsheet tracking dates, times, locations, witness statements, financial records. He told me this was just one copy. Others were already with his attorney. I accused him of spying, violating my privacy. He said he'd been careful. One-party consent recordings in our state, public photos, voluntary witnesses, legal access to shared financial data. He said I'd made it easy by being so open and unapologetic. I threatened to fight him for custody, to make sure he never saw the kids without supervision. He looked at me with pity and said I was welcome to try. Given my behavior, he felt confident about what a judge would decide. He told me to start thinking about where I'd live once things were finalized. Based on legal advice, he'd likely get the house as the stable parent. Then he took his folders and went upstairs, leaving me shaking in the kitchen. The cracks widened over the next days. At Iris's school pickup, other parents fell silent when I approached. Iris looked disappointed to see me instead of Derek. In the car, she finally confessed that a friend had asked why there were pictures of me online with a man who wasn't her father. She'd told her to mind her own business, then cried in the bathroom because she didn't know how to explain. At home, Iris shut herself in her room and told me to go away. Saturday, at Owen's sports day, Derek stood with his parents while I stayed on the opposite side of the gym. pretending I didn't notice how every teacher and parent seemed to know my story. Owen looked for Derek's approval every time he completed an activity. He never once looked for me. Then Callum walked in with another woman, laughing, relaxed, his arm draped behind her chair. My whole body went cold. He wasn't there for me. He hadn't even known I'd be there. But Derek noticed where I was looking. The timing, the coincidence, felt too pointed to be accidental. Whether Derek arranged it or not, the humiliation was complete. After the event, I tried to hug Owen. He was already holding Derek's hand, walking out with his grandparents. That night, Derek said he was taking the kids to his parents' house again. They needed stability, he said, and Brenda and Paul's place offered that. When I protested, he calmly invited me to call the police if I believed he was kidnapping them. He would happily show the officers his documentation. He said temporary custody patterns during separation were common and often became the basis for final arrangements. I watched them pack and leave like they were escaping, not visiting. Alone in the house, I broke. I went into Derek's locked office using the spare key I knew about. Filing cabinets full of neatly labeled folders, finances, medical records, school communications, household inventory. On the desk, his calendar, filled with circled dates, one in particular at 9 a.m. next Monday. Service. I didn't know what it meant, but dread clawed at me. I called my sister. Voicemail. I called my mother. Voicemail. I called my friend Janelle. She said everyone was just trying to protect themselves now, that nobody wanted to be in the middle, and then she hung up. Derek came home Sunday evening, without the kids. They were staying at his parents' house for the school week, he said. He'd stay at a hotel while he handled some personal business. I asked what business. He looked at me with those calm, final eyes and said I'd find out tomorrow morning. Then he packed a bag, locked his office, and left me alone in the house we'd built together, surrounded by the wreckage of a life I'd thought I was too special to lose. Friday afternoon, my mother called for the first time in weeks. I thought she might finally be ready to talk. Instead, she told me she was in the ER. Her blood pressure had been so high, her doctor sent her straight to the hospital. She said it was probably stress. She said she'd told the doctor what her eldest daughter had been putting the family through. Even from a hospital bed, she blamed me. I went anyway. When I found everyone in the cafeteria, my sisters, my in-laws, Derek, they stared at me like I was an intruder. Simone demanded to know why I was there. Brenda said that if I'd cared about the family's well-being, I wouldn't have spent months tearing it apart. Claire reminded me I'd never cared about public scenes before, so why start now? Then my mother appeared, frail in a hospital gown, gripping an IV pole. She looked me in the eyes and said I shouldn't have come. She said if I'd cared about her, I would have thought about how my behavior humiliated our entire family, instead of parading around with another man while still married. She told me to leave before I made her blood pressure spike again. No one defended me. Not my husband. Not my siblings. Not even my mother. I walked out of the cafeteria and screamed in my car until my voice broke. The weekend passed in silence. Derek stayed at a hotel. The kid stayed with his parents. No one called. Monday morning, I went to the courthouse to pay a traffic ticket. A man with a clipboard stopped me in the plaza and asked if I was Thessaly Moorgrave. I said yes. He handed me a manila envelope. "You've been served." He took a photo of me holding the papers. Then he walked away. In the sunlight, with people rushing past, I tore open the envelope, and my life fell apart sheet by sheet. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Temporary orders. Derek listed infidelity. Requested exclusive use of the house. Requested temporary primary custody. Requested supervised visitation for me. A restraining order preventing me from accessing joint accounts. Then the evidence list. 47 photos. 12 recorded conversations. Social media screenshots. 14 witness statements from teachers, neighbors, co-workers, from my own family. Financial records highlighting every dollar I'd spent on the affair. A preliminary custody evaluation recommending the children stay with Derek. Pages scattered around me as people watched. Someone filmed. Marcus and Claire stood on the courthouse steps, not gloating, just witnessing something they'd always seen coming. I tried calling Derek. Blocked. Callum. Voicemail full. My mother. Declined. My sister. Blocked. Even a friend texted, "Please don't contact me again." I sat by the fountain reading the custody report. I'd demonstrated a pattern of prioritizing adult relationships over children's emotional needs. The children showed anxiety when asked about me. They were secure with Derek. It hit me then. The truth I'd avoided for months. I had lost my children because I'd chosen to lose them. I had chosen Callum's attention over my own family, chosen excitement over stability, chosen lies over responsibility. I had convinced myself I was the victim while destroying everything that mattered. In 3 weeks, I'd stand before a judge and try to explain the inexplicable. Try to argue for custody when every page of evidence showed I'd abandoned my family long before Derek filed paperwork. When I looked up, Derek's family was watching me from across the plaza. Not triumphant, just tired, hurt, done. Maybe Derek had already gone home to our children, getting them ready for school, protecting them as he always had, while I stood alone in the ruins of my own choices. I walked to my car and sat there until a parking attendant tapped on my window. "Are you okay?" No, I wasn't okay. I had finally reached the point where consequences stopped caring about excuses. They simply existed, and they were mine.